Hey, it's B and Zach here, and we're going to go over the FMS, the functional movement screen, and tell you a little bit more about the individual tests and what it means so you can interpret it for your own results.
Sounds groovy.
Okay, so Zach, why don't you tell us first what is the FMS?
Sure. If you don't mind me just saying, I'll just say that it was actually created by a doctor of physical therapy, and he was also a strength and conditioning coach. He came up with the idea of the functional movement screen because physical therapists would do pain screens and clearing exams and stuff like that before you get released out into the world to do your own thing. So what wasn't happening in the gym facility or gym setting was people would come in. We didn't know any of their background, nothing like that, and then we'd ask them to go do a whole bunch of different movements in the gym with no understanding of how they actually move their body in space at all. So he kind of came up with this screen. So really the functional movement screen is 7 different movement patterns in which we do 7 primal patterns that we train that can be improved upon in strength. So really that's why we use the functional movement screen, is ultimately to get an understanding of how someone moves before we even start working with them, right?
Yeah. And can you talk a little bit, a lot of people, think that the functional movement screen is, whether or not you're going to get injured, which we like to say, it's not a guaranteed yes or no, but why there is a correlation and why we use it for that.
Sure. So that's actually a really good question, and a lot of people do get really caught up on, talking about injury risk and mitigating risk of injury. Ultimately, at a standpoint, we cannot say that, hey, we're going to reduce injury, because we just don't know if that's going to happen or not, right?
But and a totally healthy individual can get injured still.
100%, yeah. So, but the correlation there is that these movement patterns are asking basically multiple joints and muscles to work together in harmony to create a certain pattern. And what happens ultimately is that if people have restricted or struggle with certain flexibility or joint mobility, then their low score in a functional movement screen is correlated with injury, because okay, I can't use my hips, now I'm going to start using my back, which should be really nice and stable, and the hips should be really mobile. But if I'm not using that and I'm using the back, then now I'm just adding more pressure into that really stable joint. So right. That would be like a good example. But that's really the correlation between mitigating risk of injury, and then also why we're going to score you on these movement patterns. Yeah.
Exactly. Right. Yeah. So it's just like, having a hole in your roof. It might not be leaking, but if it just keeps getting thinner, and then it keeps raining and it keeps raining, eventually,
and then a hailstorm comes.
It's probably going to soak your house.
Yeah.
So great. Thanks for that. And then can you talk a little bit about, or tell people about the scoring?
Sure. So a few different things. Obviously, since there's 7 movement patterns that you look at the screen, we're going to score someone. There is a point system to it. 3 being ultimately moving optimally. Yeah, exactly. 2 is going to have some restriction, but the person can do it. And then 1 is ultimately this person can't do said movement pattern.
Restricted movement.
Yeah, so there's an optimal score of 21 out of 21, which probably no one's got. Maybe 1 or 2 people. But when we look at that, we're really looking at ranges of scores. So if someone's getting an 18 out of 21, they're probably going to move really well throughout the facility or the gym, or even in life. And most of the time when we do some of the health history on a lot of people, we get their score and we go, hey, have you been injured that much? And they're usually no, usually, I go to the gym every day and it's everything good. And, I'm like, well, you got kids? They're like, yeah, kids. Did your back ever hurt? No, back never hurts, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
But then when you have, these ranges of 13 or less, then we're looking into some seriously dysfunctional movement patterns.
So 14's kind of our recommended level.
At least to be going, hey, we can do some strength movements, or otherwise you may just need to be doing some corrective work. Like right now, I know that you want to like lift a heavy weight, but it might be better for you to be doing some joint mobility work.
You need to correct what you got first. Yeah.
Because I mean, a lot of the time I try and tell people is like, hey, if you're really dysfunctional, you're not moving great in that pattern, it's probably not the best we put a barbell on your back and then start loading that thing, you know? It's not going to improve the pattern at all, yeah.
Totally.
So that's where I usually go with someone with that. One other thing just to mention, in saying that, we always need to interpret the results because there are a couple pain clearing exams. So someone may still score an 18, but, and we'll figure this out a little later, but there's a pain screen for your shoulder. And if you're in an unweighted position and you're already getting pain, they're going to get a 0 out of that. So we always need to make sure, hey, even if they're getting an 18, is there any pain in those movements that's going to score them a 0 in that? So
and pain on any test, we automatically refer to a specialist or a physical therapist, doctor, because you really should get that looked out right away.
Immediately.
Before you do anything else.
Well, for sure. And our scope is only so big. That's why I like giving it to doctors anyway. So, you know, especially when there is pain. Yeah.
And then can you talk a little bit about if someone, so, you know, 3 is optimal and 2 is kind of caution, but both of those are considered, you know, acceptable scores. But if some of the tests are, you know, unilateral, they measured both sides of the body, and if you score 3 on one side and a 2 on the other side, why would that be a problem in the test, even though both the scores are acceptable?
Sure. So if you are moving really well on one side of the body and not the other, then what's most likely going to happen, I mean, I can't say it will happen, or what could happen is ultimately you're going to favor one side of the body more. So then you're going to put too much pressure on said joint. So like, you know, let's say for an inline lunge, right, which is kind of like a single leg pattern, if you move really well in getting the left leg into like extension, but you don't do so well on the right, then most of the time you're probably going to have the other foot backwards, right? And you're always going to have that foot backwards, which will just exacerbate the situation and make it worse and worse. So I'm trying to put it in layman's terms as best as possible, but the more pressure you place on one side of the body and not the other, then you're going to get weaker on that other side.
Totally.
And then the other side is going to get cranky as hell because all you've been doing is getting like flexion and extension out of all those joints all the time.
Exactly. So asymmetry, basically what you're saying is even if it starts out and both of the ranges are acceptable, there's still an off balance, and you're still going to continue to do that off balance, and eventually that 3 and 2 is going to become a 2 and a 1, and then that 1, you know, is possibly going to become an injury.
Just a painful like movement every time, and then, you know, now you're in injury town already, right?
Yeah, you want to have balance.
It's exactly right. So for a lot of us, when we see that on this screen, is most of the time we look at, okay, why are they getting asymmetries, and then we try and like put trace it back, and then insert exercises that may not be the movement pattern at all.
Yeah.
But it might help eliminate some of those asymmetries from the body. Yeah.
Exactly. Okay, well, let's break down all of the tests so everybody can kind of understand them individually a little bit more and how they relate to everyday life. So let's go over the shoulder mobility test. Sure.
So when we look at shoulder mobility, basically, can I actually show them real quick? So it's actually a super simple screen, and it actually looks like probably when you were young, you used to try and like touch your hand behind your back. It's something very similar to that. What we're actually looking at is, so, you know, we have internal and external rotation of the shoulder, but then we're also looking at someone's rib cage and someone's like T-spine, basically their upper back, and then you got shoulder blades that work in there. So we're looking at like this harmony of basically your two limbs, your arms working, but they're attached to rib cage, you know, your thoracic spine. You got your shoulder blades and all that kind of stuff. So when we look at that and we score someone, we are closing in basically. If they get a 3, they're going to be within a hand's length of each other from knuckle to knuckle. People who score like a 1 are going to be like literally their one hand's going to be like right at the back of the head, and the other one's going to be right in the lower back.
You just barely got it behind you.
And it probably hurts them already, like just to get from here to here. So what we know is like, hey, we're probably going to close in that we may need to work on like here, this whole lateral line. You've got your lats, you've got your triceps. They're probably going to be super tight, especially if you got that desk job and you're sitting like this all the time.
So a low score, it doesn't just mean you got a tight shoulder. There's so many other things that can be.
It's exactly right. And it's not like, hey, I'm just going to do this before I do some push-ups or bench
arm
press,
circles.
Yeah. Yeah, there's so much going on at that point. Like when we're really looking at what attaches here, you know, our lat actually attaches at the front, pec attaches to the front, then you got your bicep that comes up through the front here. So, I mean, it could be like a myriad of different muscles. It could be the joint itself, like the glenohumeral, the head, the humeral head may not even be sitting in the glenohumeral joint correctly. So if it's not even sitting in the incorrect spot, then you're already going to piss off the shoulders already, you know. So many different things you got to think of. But that's why it's so important.
Let me just say, we're not going to go over in this video all the exercises that you can do. What we're going to do is in the description below, we are going to list, you know, if you scored poorly on a test, you know, with exactly what's happening. Like if, you know, you're struggling with your top arm or your bottom arm, we'll list links to videos on correct exercises there. So that's where you can find how to fix what you're doing. But let's just say more for practical application, if you scored poorly on this test, how would that affect you in real life?
Sure.
Like what's something that we do every day? Like why do we even measure shoulder? Why does it even matter to have shoulder mobility?
Yeah, that's a great point. So really, I mean, if we're just talking about general population, we're looking at shoulder mobility for two patterns, basically our pressing and pulling pattern. Super important. I mean, who's ever pulled themselves out of a swimming pool? That's a pulling and then a pushing pattern. Yeah. If you've already got pain or you got like asymmetries or some sort of limitation here, that's going to hurt like hell getting yourself in and out of the water. I mean, if you're playing with your kids on your tummy or on your back and you got to press yourself up off the floor, I mean, you don't realize how many times we use a pressing pattern or a pulling pattern throughout the day. I mean, even pulling stuff out of the laundry. You know, I mean, there's so many different like
everywhere.
Yeah, there's so many different ways we use that movement pattern in there. Yeah.
And then what about some examples for so a way that this pattern would relate in the fire department would be
great point. So for really when we're looking at our fire department, I mean, even reeling in hoses, I mean, that is our pulling pattern. When we're having to go grab someone and pick them up, I mean, again, we're going to use different movement patterns, probably actually combine a lot of them. But even when you're having to pick someone up off from the fire, again, you're going to be using your shoulders, lats, everything to try and pick that person up. If you're having to press yourself off the ground the same way, right, with 30 pounds of excess stuff on your back, I mean, that's a lot of pressure to be putting on those shoulder joints of yours, you know?
Yeah, exactly. And even something, you know, we're thinking wear and tear, something as small as, you know, pulling yourself in and out of the engine every single day. And how many times do you guys do that? So that...
Well, and even worse, you probably because it's such a small thing, you get even less cognizant of how well you should do it.
Yeah, nobody's like pulling themselves in all braced core.
Exactly. So, I mean, I'm sure when you're like, all right, I got to pick this person up, you may have like, you know, in your mind, it's like, all right, maybe I need to engage a few things to do it. But something as simple like I've had a really long day and I'm just picking myself up into the truck and it's just yanking your shoulder all the time. I mean, that stuff is where most of the injuries happen, right? Is when you're not cognizant of it at all.
Exactly, the little everyday small patterns.
Yeah, that's a great point.
Okay, let's talk about the active straight leg rigs test.
Yeah, so the good old, you know, quote unquote tight hamstring. So basically you'll be lying down and you're gonna raise one leg in the air. We're actually looking at a few different things with that. We're looking obviously at hamstring flexibility and then looking actually at how strong your core is too. But I mean, when we're thinking of that screen, we're thinking of like a hinge pattern, which is like a deadlift. So if you do that in the gym, it'd be a deadlift. But that pattern is probably like the most important one because when we truly need to like pick something off of the floor, we need to make sure that we have both our hamstrings pretty flexible, but we can actually move through our hips and not our lower back. So When we're looking at just general population, I mean, same thing, picking kids up off the floor. And it's like...
People throw their back out picking their kids up, I feel like,
all
the time.
Yeah, I went to go, I mean, I've had a few back injuries in my time, and let me tell you, one, I was feeling really tight one day, and I put my shoes on, and my freaking lower back went out. And then, I mean, I'm sure it was already out along that way, but... I mean, if I'm tight and I'm hunching over instead of sitting down and actually pushing my backside back, right, lower back just blew a disc right there. So
yeah,
you know,
totally.
Yeah, so it's real. Like, I mean, you guys actually probably don't even realize how much you use a hinging pattern and why it's so important. And actually, a lot of this pattern in general gets lost a lot.
Yeah.
We've really lost how to push our hips back.
Yeah.
Be able to pick up something really heavy off the floor without, you know, basically hurting our backs or anything like that.
Well, I think a lot of people, you know, there's little catchphrases that get used all the time and then they stick, and sometimes those aren't the most helpful. Like, I think a lot of people think that the most powerful pattern is a squat.
Yeah.
And so, you know, you hear when everybody's like, you know, trying to lift with a squat, you know, everybody's just like, bend your knees, like, bend your knees, like, keep your chest up and
look up.
Looking up, there's no way you can hinge, you know, so you're not actually using the strongest pattern. And then there's also a lot of reasons why your hamstrings could be tight. It's not just necessarily a bad thing. Your hamstrings could be tight because they're protecting your back.
Exactly,
so they're tight because they're weak. So it doesn't just mean that they need to be stretched. They also might need to be strengthened, which is counter for some people because they think like, oh, I don't want to do any hamstring stuff because I'm going to get more tight, but you actually need to so that they can release, you know.
For sure. That part, that's a great point, B, is that part's called like muscle inhibition. So if the body's actually a lot more smart than you think, and it has all these alarm bells that go on in it, and basically people lose the ability to bend over. So if they're using their back, right, we lose balance in our feet, right, because we're not pushing our hips back. And the body goes, hey, hamstrings, tighten up because this fool's about to fall on his head, right, straight onto the ground. So the hamstrings go like this. Then you go, oh, okay, well, yeah, I can't get my hands past my knees anymore, right? The reason is because you've lost how to move your hips, you know? Yeah. So it's funny, people go, yeah, I got these tight hamstrings, and we do a couple exercises with them, and they go, oh, shit, that was kind of easy. And you're like, yeah, it's not because they're tight, it's because you lost how to actually move your body.
Yeah, which is another big cue for us with just this whole movement screen is it's not always like you need to do so much corrective exercise, but maybe you just need to re-educate yourself on some patterns.
Exactly.
And that might open up so many doors for you.
Yeah.
Let's talk about, with regards to the fire department, what is, you know, what's an example of when they might lift or use this pattern?
I mean,
every single day.
Every single day. And
lifting anything.
Yeah, I'm saying I hate using the same basically examples as last time, but I mean, honestly, like, especially when you're picking up someone who may be unconscious and that's like quote unquote dead weight.
Yeah.
I mean, that seriously takes some strength for you guys to lift those people up off the floor. You better be doing it correctly. Yeah. You know, I mean, you better be able to use your glutes and your hamstrings, and basically, I mean, the whole backside of your body is called your posterior chain. And if you aren't using that, then that's an issue. That's a big issue.
And I think the problem is, you know, your body is going to be so much more forgiving when you're 20-something. You know, so you might get away with lifting a lot of things a lot of times with a terrible pattern. But let me tell you, when you get older, your body is not going to be as forgiving. And that's where those poor educational patterns of how to move are going to catch up to you and, you know, result in throwing your back out.
Yeah, no, exactly right. And you know, the one other thing about that pattern is that if you really look at it, it is actually, it really is bringing you up into center. Yeah. You know, so if you're not doing it right, yeah, that's such a big issue. I mean, when you're from the ground, you're actually picking yourself up into a nice extended position. When done correctly, it's a very powerful position for the body, right? Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, let's talk about the deep squat.
Yeah, so deep squat. When we look at that pattern, it's one of the first really to that we look at when we screen someone.
And it really tells us so much about the body, just, you know.
100%. I mean, the screen itself, actually, you have a dowel over your head. So with most of these screens, actually, we do tend to look at not just everything in isolation. So when people think of squat, they think of lower body. We're actually looking at how does the upper body work well with the lower body on that screen.
Yeah.
As a kid, when you get from crawling, the next progression is squatting, and so it's one of the most like foundational patterns that we can actually perform as humans. We do it, hopefully, if you have great bowel movements, like a couple times a day, right? Like, and we look at the difference between China and here. Like, China don't have toilets, right?
Yeah.
I mean, they're squatting like
Ass to grass.
ass to grass. It's exactly right. And here we have these porcelain things that make us like squat to only halfway,
Yeah.
but that's one of the reasons for having that pattern is actually to be able to squat down on the ground and take a poop. That's one of the first things. But we know when we do our squat pattern, we're ultimately looking at going down and inspecting something, being able to actually hang out in that position for a while instead of standing. We should be able to sit in a really nice squat position without too much flexion of our upper back.
Yeah.
And then obviously, why that's so important, just for general pop. I mean, if you're struggling to take a shit, that's an issue if you can't even squat down to do something that we should be doing as a function, a couple times a day.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then for the fire department, again, this is a pattern similar to the last one that you're using every day. I mean, every time you guys are responding to so many medical cases, just the changing of level of getting down, to someone on the ground to getting back up.
It's exactly right. Even if you're not picking them up, you should be able to squat down, inspect someone, either or even be like putting new tools in the bag, whatever it is.
Yeah.
You should be able to do that up and down, no problem, right? Or even if you're squatting down to get down to your knees.
Yeah.
I mean, that should be done correctly, not, hey, let me just fall over here and then kind of like clonk onto my knees a little bit, So really for the fire department, absolutely right. We're really looking at, if you are looking after someone in a medical emergency, then you should be able to squat down, check their breathing, do all that kind of stuff. Yeah.
Awesome. Okay, the rotary stability test.
Yeah. So that's actually a few things that we're looking here. Like I said before, we're looking at joints and just things working in harmony together. So we're actually looking with rotary stability. Think about actually rotation and then resisting rotation too. You'll see this in another pattern, but I mean, what do you guys think of when you think between hips and shoulders? You got your spine, which is basically the brain communicates with the muscles via the spine. We look at all our vital organs are in between the hips and shoulders. So really rotary stability, when we're looking at resisting rotation or rotating, is like, hey, can this person move the hips and shoulders in a good position? Right?
Yeah.
That's what we're
to protect your
all of this
hub.
major stuff.
Yeah,
I mean there's so much going on right there.
Yeah.
So most people tend to look at rotary stability. It can be something as simple as running, to be resisting constantly just pulling the shoulder around all the time, or the hips moving all over the place. So
I mean, that's the number one, like you don't need a background in anything to run a marathon, and that's everybody's bucket list. Like, I'm gonna run a marathon, And that amount of just time and hours without proper is just gonna break you down.
and that's the other thing too, is that people say, oh, I got bung knees because I run. And it's like, well, that just might be because, maybe my knee just, it like overextends or whatever. Like, it might be the fact that you just can't even resist rotation, right? Like, every step you make and the shoulder keeps doing this, right? Now you're just placing more pressure into that right knee all the time, right? No one ever tends to look at like, hey, is this person staying in a nice upright position and able to move the shoulders around and the legs around at the same time?
I ran a marathon, and there's tons and tons of people, and it was one of those rock and roll, it's like switchbacks, and so you might pass someone that's like 3 miles ahead of me. I mean, I got passed by like someone with one leg. So I got passed with like a lady, she looked like she was 80 years old, and she like had a hobble, and I was like, man, this lady with her pattern is like running faster than I am, you can run dysfunctionally. Anybody can.
And that was the other thing that comes back to this
Yeah.
this said screen and an assessment is that, I mean, again, it's not going to mitigate risk, but if you were to see some like an Ethiopian or a Kenyan run really gracefully
Yeah.
and not get injured, and then you see this other person, it's like, who do you think is
That's
going
not
to
how I
get?
run.
Yeah, who do you think is going to get more injured or more likely to get
Yeah.
injured? Right? Is it the person that looks like they're about to do a head slam every time they run?
Yeah.
Take a step. Yeah.
Yeah. So this pattern in the fire department, I mean, it's so, you guys are carrying so many things. It's not just the lifting and the squatting down, but anything from like, throwing a hose on your shoulder or anything where you're having to just even carry something heavy with one hand, a ladder.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, even next time you guys do this, have a look. Like even when you're carrying groceries, but especially for the fire department, if you're carrying a hose, like watch what's happening. Is either one side sinking a little bit. Is it rotating forward? Or are you kind of leaning back? So it's like when you do simple stuff like that, like what kind of pressure are you placing upon your spine? Because remember, it's got to get stacked onto the pelvis. So if it's not getting stacked correctly, something's got to kink, right? So that's the big worry.
Yeah. Okay, the inline lunge.
Oh, inline lunge, yeah. So we're looking really for like a sports pattern. We're looking at someone's ability to actually hit the brakes, right? So they're running, and then we're really looking at them. How can they stop, and are they stopping well, and can they stop quick?
Yeah. Their acceleration and deceleration is obviously going to be on one leg. Nobody just is running and then maybe a horse like puts both legs, like you're gonna push off of one leg. Yeah
Exactly right. So that's where we start looking really into some of those single leg patterns. So the other important thing is that you're looking, your hips are basically they're disassociating between two legs, right? So now we got one leg in flexion, one leg in extension. So when we're looking at this, it's like the same thing comes into this asymmetry pattern. So for general population, if you're playing like a weekend sport or you're chasing after your kids, if you've already got like an asymmetry happening, and then you're looking to like try and stop, and then you try and stop on your non-favored side, like if you aren't prepared for that, there's going to be damage control. You know, so super important. We're looking at our ability to run and then just stop for like any general pop.
Or even if people who are just training in the gym and they got a program that they saw online, it's got lunges in it. And
it's exactly right. Yeah,
it's like a go-to move, and like that pattern's not right. You think you're like following a great program that's like you should not be doing that.
Exactly right. Or it's like, hey, I know that this left like hip flexor is just really tight and it kind of crunches me up, but you know what, like I'm just gonna go ahead and do these lunges.
I'm just gonna lean super far forward.
Let me just crunch my lower back while I do that at the same time. It's like, hey, maybe we should just remove that exercise for now until maybe we can improve this or somewhere that's making it wrong. Let's improve that first.
And so a direct correlation for this with the fire department is just you guys respond to emergencies all the time, so you guys are doing a lot of running, whether you're running, stopping. I mean, you don't have to be playing a sport.
No, exactly right. Yeah, emergency. I'll walk over.
Excuse me, I have a bad pattern. I need to walk here.
For sure. You guys are going to be running towards that, the injured patient.
Please walk to the fire.
Yeah.
You scored a 1.
No, exactly. Yeah. Remember, Johnny, you got to walk. All right. Yeah. So.
Okay, so last one is the hurdle step.
Sure. Hurdle step is actually like the true single leg, really looking at someone's actually ability to run. Last time I checked, if you run with both legs on the ground at the same time, it's called a hop. So running is a real single leg pattern. What we're really looking at, quite a few things going on here, is basically you've got some really mobile joints, the hip and the ankle, then you've got a really stable joint, your knee. So we're really looking at, can this person pick up one leg, balance on the other, right, and then take a simple step forward and come back. Let me tell you, this one is not as easy as it looks. Like a lot of people like they're all wobbling all over the place. Again, like I said, we try and tie up the upper body. So it's like, how many times does this person need to like crunch to lift up the other leg, right? Again, if you
got stairs in your house. You know, you're
It's-
walking upstairs every
Yeah,
day.
I mean, if you're like doing this every time you take a step, there's an
Yeah.
issue, right?
You're walking upstairs with a kid.
Yeah.
Throw that on there, you know?
Well, exactly, and then this is where the patterns all tie in together. We
Yeah.
talked about that rotary stability pattern, right? If you got bad rotary stability, that's probably one of the reasons too why you suck at running, and probably the reason why your knees hurt is because now I'm doing this to pick up the knee and my hip flexors are tight. It's like all these things merge together.
Yeah,
you
you
know?
got to trace it back upstream to the originator, which might be something so simple that you think is like, I'm just getting old, so I got a tight shoulder, or I
Sure.
got tight hips or whatever, but really like flowing downstream, it just starts to affect everything you're doing.
100%, yeah. 100%.
Yeah. And then for this one, a really good example that's just, you know, every day in the fire department is just the same thing, getting in and out of the rig. You know, you can't lift your leg standing on one leg. It's gonna, you know, you're gonna have to put a lot of weight in your shoulder, and then all of a sudden that shoulder's tight, and all of a sudden you
And
pull out your
we-
shoulder, pulling yourself up.
Exactly, and we talked about that before.
Yeah.
Like, this is why the patterns merge together, is because
Yeah.
said, hey, I injured my shoulder, but that might be because you're having to rely on the shoulder more because
Yeah.
you can't even pick the leg up,
Yeah.
right? Like, if that's a struggle, then you know, like, hey, I injured my shoulder because of this, but yeah, it might be because you can't stand on one leg.
Yeah.
You know, like something as simple as that.
And like the whole thing is, you could be doing these patterns that are kind of exacerbating things at work or anything, and then you know you go home and you squat to pick up a pencil and you throw your back out. So it doesn't mean you're gonna get injured on the job or not. But like it's just half of us are kind of walking around with all of these, you know, restrictions or imbalances, and if we don't have any idea or look into it, then
For sure.
anything can.
For sure, and honestly, like the reason what we tie really into this is that, and I try and tell people this when we do this at our facility, and you know, I mean, they do this at other facilities too,
Yeah.
but it's like, you will actually learn something about yourself that day,
Yeah.
right? Like, instead of just coming into the gym and thinking you're gonna beat the living hell out of your body,
Yeah.
which most people still have that mentality,
Yeah.
is like, hey, let's actually get you to understand why you're moving, how you move, and like,
How you can move better.
yeah, or like more importantly, like, oh my god, in 3 weeks, I've never felt like I've been able to move like this, or I thought this was lost.
Yeah.
Right? You know, like I was 20, I could do this, now I'm 50,
Yeah.
and I thought I'd just lost it forever.
Yeah.
No, your body was designed to move.
Yeah.
Let's make sure you know what you're doing. You
Yeah.
know? Yeah.
Yeah, so I think kind of in closure, the FMS for us it's a really fundamental tool to help give us a blueprint. You know, it's not the answer
Yeah.
just like where we're here to tell you, you got ones across the board, like you suck, you can't move. It's more, you know, hey, here's some things that you can add to your workout, or here's some things you shouldn't be doing, or different ways to program to help optimize your movement. So it's not just a yes, no, good, bad, you're in, you're out kind of thing. It's a tool that we use to program for people to help them move better.
For sure, and just to add upon that, I thought that was great. I honestly thought the blueprint's such a great word, because it really is the starting point for someone. But when we're looking at this too, it's not to say, hey, you're going to be like this for the rest of your life. It's like, hey, this is the starting point. Let's improve you, and then we'll take another test again,
Yeah.
and let's see how much you improved.
Yeah.
Right? Okay. Hey, now we can throw back in this squat pattern that you couldn't do before. Great. You know, like, that's awesome. Like, it's great feeling that you go, all right, I couldn't do this before because whatever was tight, or my joint mobility sucked, or whatever. But then, you know, you work on it and you go, hey, I can do this now with no pain, nothing. It feels great.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's awesome.
Yeah. Well, that's it. Hopefully you guys learned something.
Yeah, hopefully.
Thanks, Zach, and make sure to check out the links below for individual corrective exercise videos for each of the tests.
Thanks, guys.
Yay!
Yay.